Today we'll be testing the Radeon RX 6600 XT in a bunch of games. So we've got the latest AMD Adrenalin software installed. We are pairing this with a 12400F 6-core 12-thread CPU, and for memory we've got 16 gigabytes of DDR4 running at 30 to 100 MHz CL16. Now, AMD marketed this card as a 1080p gaming card, and that's the resolution that we'll be testing at today with the high quality settings in games. So the first game we'll be testing is Elden Ring. It was Game of the Year for 2022, and yeah, you can see we're testing at 1080p on maximum quality settings. Now, the area I'll be testing is the Church of Ela, or Eli, or however you pronounce it. This is where it's located on the map. And what I've got is I've got a predetermined path that I'm running. Let's just start our benchmark run here. We'll be running towards the northeast, and we'll fight some enemies, and we'll go over a bluff or a cliff, and then we'll just have a look at what the averages and the 1% and the 0.1% lows are looking like. Now you can see here that the game is running at 60 frames per second, and that is because the game is locked at 60 frames per second. So you can see that our GPU usage is not even close to 100%. It's doing fairly well here, only drawing about between 80 and 100 watts, and it's staying quite cool. We're sitting at about 51 degrees Celsius at the moment. Now, just going to fight a few enemies here. Elden Ring is actually one of the more difficult games, one of the easiest Souls games, but it's still a pretty difficult game. Now, I'm a little bit higher level for this particular area, which just makes it a little bit easier for me to benchmark here. Right, so now you can see we are just going over this hill here, and the world opens up a bit, and still this GPU is capable of giving us a locked 60 frames per second experience. Now the GPU usage does go up a little bit in this area. It's probably just because of the wide open spaces and the render distance increasing. But still, the 6600 XT has no problem giving us a locked 60 frames per second experience here. Now, I also tested this at 1440p off screen, and it did pretty well, but we'll do a deeper dive into all of these games at a later stage. But here you can see that this GPU had no problem running this game at 1080p on maximum settings. Alright, next up we have Spider-Man Remastered. So you can see we're running at 1080p, no upscaling, no FSR, and we are also using the very high preset. Right, so I'm just going to be looking around, swinging around, running around, not doing much, but just to see how this GPU does in this game. And so far it's looking good. Now, Spider-Man can actually be a little bit temperamental, especially when it comes to CPU usage, and especially once you start enabling ray tracing. Now over here we are getting a high refresh rate experience. It does dip every now and again. It goes down to around 80 or so, depending on which area you are and also how far you are from the ground. This game is particularly interesting because the higher you go, the higher your frame rate goes as well. But that's actually pretty good. I just want to show you once I can reach the top of this building here. We're just going to overlook the whole of New York City to see what the frame rate is like. But you can see we got 120 frames per second, and then it just drops down to about 80, and then it stabilizes at 150. Right, so just going to jump off here, and you can see the frame rate drop the closer we get to the ground. Now that makes a lot of sense because up in the air there's obviously not a lot of detail. You can see pretty far, but the finer detail is obviously lacking. Alright, so we've got an average of about 107 frames per second, with the 1% low sitting at 68 and the 0.1% low sitting at 61. Now I'm going to try and enable ray tracing. Now, Spider-Man only supports ray traced reflections. We'll leave it on high and geometry detail on high as well. And let's see how it goes. We've got no FSR enabled still. And we are getting almost 60 FPS constantly. Let's just reset the numbers there. Well, up in the air, once again, the frame rate is a little bit higher than closer to the ground. And this is actually pretty playable. I mean, 50 frames per second for Spider-Man is not bad. You can see the reflections are a lot more detailed. It's a lot more accurate. The actual buildings behind you show up in the reflections here. But personally, I don't think the performance hit is worth it. Even though Spider-Man is playable at 60 frames per second, the performance hit is still pretty big. Right, so let's see if we can rectify that by making use of upscaling. So this game supports multiple upscaling methods, but we'll be testing FSR. It does support FSR 2.1, and we are just going to go with the quality preset. All right, so we are still getting around 60 frames per second. Well, it's going up into the 70s, but it is still dropping below 60 every now and again. So it doesn't seem like FSR helped us in maintaining a full 60 FPS experience here, but it still looks pretty good. Once again, I'm not a fan of using upscaling at 1080p, but if you've got no other choice, then you've got no other choice, right? But that's why I said I'd rather not use ray tracing in Spider-Man. I don't even use it on my personal gaming rig, which has an RTX 3080. It's just, I mean, the reflections, you very rarely notice it. Sure, if you're going to look for it, you'll notice it, but Spider-Man is a very fast-paced game, so I'm pretty sure you won't, and therefore I recommend disabling RT reflections. Alright, and next up we've got The Witcher 3 still at 1080p. We've got our hardware cursor enabled because otherwise the mouse movement's just too slow. If we have a look at our graphic settings, I'm just going to use the Ultra preset. The ray tracing is disabled, and we are using TAAU with no dynamic resolution scaling. Our disabled motion blur for obvious reasons. Nvidia Hairworks is also disabled. Personally, I don't think it's worth it either, and that's pretty much it. Now, once again, we are outside of the Baron's Castle in Velen. This time I've got my trusted horse with me because we're going to be roaming the countryside with our horse as well. Running into this villager, you can see our frame rate is above 100, which is pretty good. It does drop to the low 90s, the high 80s. We are seeing a few stutters, but I mean, this is the Witcher 3 next gen update running on DirectX 12, so I mean, that's just normal. That was a pretty big one there, and that dropped our 1% lows, our 0.1% lows, down to 8 frames per second. Not sure if we'll be able to recover from that one, but I'm just going to run around a little bit. This is just my usual benchmark run, if you remember. I'm just going to jump into the water here, see what the frame rate is like. We do get a drop into the 80s, but overall it's doing very well. In my previous videos, I mentioned that running Witcher at ultra settings at 40 frames per second is completely acceptable. Going below 40 frames per second, you start feeling the input latency, especially, or even if you are running with a controller or playing with a controller. But that's just my personal opinion, of course. So we'll just be running around in the woods here. We do notice the occasional stutter every now and again, but overall the game plays very well. We are staying above 90 frames per second, even in this densely vegetated area, which is pretty good. Once again, this GPU was specifically designed for 1080p gaming, and it seems that even the most demanding games on the most demanding settings at 1080p has got no issues whatsoever, except when it maybe comes to ray tracing, which we'll test out right now. So I'm just going to enable ray traced GI, and all the other options then become available. So we'll test with all the ray tracing options and see how it goes. Right, the menu is a little bit sluggish, and just look at that frame time graph. It's very, very up and down, inconsistent. Not sure if you can see the stuttering in the recording. I know YouTube compression does some weird things sometimes. Let's see if it helps if we enable FSR, because this is still ray tracing at native resolution, right? Sorry, the menu is just a little bit slow, not used to it, and it takes quite a while to actually respond to my commands. Let's just first try on FSR quality, and fine, we went up from 20 frames per second to 30 frames per second, but that stuttering is still there. Now, there is a fix for it, and I'll show it to you right now. What you want to do is you want to open up AMD Adrenalin software, go to gaming, select Witcher 3, the Wild Hunt, and or the Witcher 3 Wild Hunt, and enable Radeon anti-lag, and that's pretty much it. Now you can see that our frame time graph is smooth and consistent. Now I'm not sure why you need to enable that. It's probably just a bug in the game, because the Nvidia cards also have this issue. If you don't have Nvidia Reflex enabled, then you also see that same stuttering. It's pretty strange. It's the only game that I've seen it happen in. But now we can actually play this game with ray tracing at 1080p. Even though we are using FSR quality, it's still not getting 30 frames per second. So let's try disable some of the other ray tracing settings. Alright, so it seems like our frames per second went up by 3. Now that seems like a meager amount, but that's actually 10%. Now, it's definitely not a world of difference. Yeah, we are getting about 40 frames per second, which is good. Now, 30 frames per second is still acceptable for a game like The Witcher, but I don't think it's necessary. You've got a very powerful 1080p graphics card here. You don't want to gimp the performance by enabling ray tracing and then gimp the visuals by enabling FSR at 1080p. It's just unnecessary in my opinion. Alright, and our next game is Cyberpunk 2077, which was also brought to us by CD Projekt Red. Now you'll see that I've got 1080p enabled here. Then for our crowd density, I've got it on low. And for our graphics settings, I'm going to use the high preset, but then I'll just disable FSR. So it'll be the 1080p resolution, high preset, but native resolution. And once again, we'll be starting outside of V's starting apartment. And wow, this actually looks pretty good. We are almost getting about 100 frames per second here. This is one of the more intensive areas in the game. Well, especially in my benchmark run, there's quite a few NPCs. Obviously now the crowd density is set to low, so there's not that many, but this specific scenario or specific scene is actually pretty CPU and GPU intensive. Now, okay, I'm guessing we've got a free ride somewhere. Seems like a little bit of a stun lock going on here. Right, there I go. So let's just get back to where I was. Forgot what I was about to say. Right, so we will be trying to drive around a little bit. This game is very intensive when driving as well. Just notice the FPS drop there. We went from about 110 to about 90 just by getting in the car, and I'm not sure why that guy was in the middle of the road there. So we'll just be driving up the road here. We'll try and make a U-turn, then we'll come back and see what the performance is like. This is just my usual benchmark run. It's just a short one, very repeatable. I don't want to take too much of your time. I know your time is valuable. Mine might not be. I mean, I'm sitting playing games, recording myself and putting this stuff on YouTube. Alright, got one. So yeah, you can see that we've got an average of 93 frames per second. Our 1% lows are sitting at 65 and our 0.1% lows are sitting at 47. Now just getting out of the car, our frame rate increased by about 10. So it's not just driving around, it's actually sitting in the car doing nothing that also pretty intensive, and that I can understand. Alright, but enough of my fooling around. Let's see what this card can do with ray tracing in Cyberpunk 2077. So I'm just going to enable the ray tracing medium preset. I'm just going to manually set FSR to quality. Let's just see if we can actually get some playable frame rates here. As you can see, ray trace reflections are not enabled. There we go, just quality FSR, and I'm just going to reload my save. Now, once again, we are outside of his apartment, and it's looking a little rough. We are getting less than half the performance we had with ray tracing disabled. Now, I'm not bashing AMD. This was their first attempt at ray tracing with RDNA 2, which the 6600 XT falls under. And at 1080p running FSR, this game looks okay. There are some artifacts, especially in the lighting there that we just saw. All in all, it looks okay. Depending on what size screen you play on, I've actually got this running on a 24-inch 1080p monitor at the moment, and it looks okay. But just remember that FSR quality at 1080p actually renders internally at 720p, so the game has got a lot less info to work with to upscale to 1080p eventually. Oh, and my driving is terrible in this game. It's not great in other games either, but I really struggle to drive well in Cyberpunk. I'm a much better driver in real life. My wife would disagree with that statement. But anyway, let's just focus on the game here. As you can see, we are still around 40 frames per second. It's not dipping too much, but once again, we don't have reflections enabled for ray tracing. So let's see what the performance impact is once we start enabling reflections. I don't think it would be a very big performance impact, especially since we are starting with such low frames anyway, or such a low frame rate. And okay, fine. So we dropped from about 38 to about 32, and that's about a 20% drop. It's not really that noticeable, seeing that we started off with 40 frames per second. And as I said about Spider-Man, I don't think you should be enabling ray tracing in this game. Rather just play at 1080p high settings. You'll get a much higher frame rate and a much better experience. Alright, next up we've got Metro Exodus, the Enhanced Edition. Now this game requires a card that supports ray tracing, so you can't not have it on. There's no upscaling that I could see. It only has the variable rate shading. That's set to 4 times at the moment. I played around with it. It does not really make a big difference with the performance. And we are playing on the medium preset. Now, I'm just showing you Metro Exodus Enhanced Edition. I don't think you should be playing this game if you've got an RX 6600 XT. Sure, it can run it. The question is rather, should you run it? As you can see, this is not even the most intensive of areas. We're actually in the sewers, and it's getting 55 frames per second. Outside in the open world, it'll get even less. I just lost my save games for some reason. I didn't play this game for quite some time, and I don't think it's got cloud saves. I reloaded my PC once or twice since then, and now I have to start from scratch. But you'll see that the lighting looks amazing. The graphics in this game looks pretty good, and the gameplay, it's a very, very good game. I enjoyed it quite a lot. I played the original version, and then I restarted the enhanced edition as well. But getting 50 frames per second in this game is, to me personally, not worth it. You do get the normal version, which runs about twice as good as this one. And there you'll be looking at between 80 and 100 frames per second with this graphics card. Yeah, you can see we're dropping into the 30s, and for a first-person shooter, that's not ideal. My advice would be to rather play the original version without ray tracing, and you'll get a much better experience. But anyway, before I die, let's move on to GTA 5. Right, so yeah, we've got GTA 5. We're running at 1080p. You'll notice that I've got MSAA on 8 times. Everything else is set to very high, pretty much the highest that I could set it to. We are running on DirectX 11 mode, and advanced graphics settings, it'll look like this. Alright, so let's see how it goes. Right, I've got to be honest, I haven't played this game in many, many years. I actually first played it on the Xbox 360. It looked like utter trash back then. Then I got an Xbox One. It looked way better. I think I completed it like 3 times on the Xbox. Then I got a PlayStation 4 and I completed it there as well. Then I got it on PC and I completed it here as well. So I've got quite a few hours in it, but it's just been a while. Alright, I'm not going to waste too much of your time with this benchmark. I just want to show you the foliage in this game, the grass, the trees, etc. These are very intensive. You can see we drop down from 80 frames per second to about 35 frames per second, 45 frames per second, and that guy keeps on calling me. That's not annoying at all. The reason is that our MSAA is set to 8 times. I just wanted to see what happens with this GPU. The best setting would be to set it to 2 times, as you'll see now. We need to accept our settings here, and our frame rate more than doubled in this pretty intensive scene. So driving around, even, you see that we went from between 80 frames per second, 100 frames per second, up to about 145 frames per second. You definitely don't need this higher frame rate in GTA 5, but it is nice to see that if you've got a 144 hertz panel, this game can actually make full use of that. All right, and next up we've got Fortnite. Once again, we are sticking to the 1080p resolution. I'm going to set the quality preset to epic, but you'll see I'll disable Nanite, which then in turn disables Lumen. Software ray tracing in this game is very intensive. Seeing that it's a competitive shooter, definitely don't use Lumen. You'll see that those options change to ambient occlusion and screen space. So let's apply that and see how it goes. Alright, so we're in the game here. We are in the Frenzy Fields. This is where I like to run my benchmarks. It's a pretty intensive area as well because it's surrounded by woods and grass and everything, and there's usually quite a few players here. To my detriment, I'm not the best Fortnite player. I do enjoy it, as I mentioned in some of my earlier videos. I used to bash it quite a lot, but I started playing it and it's not too bad. The graphics, even on this preset, it looks pretty good. We're getting about 123 frames per second inside, and outdoors it will obviously drop a little bit because of the foliage. And there's somebody here, and I'm shooting like I usually do. Yeah, we're getting about 100 frames per second outside. Now the 1% and the 0.1% lows are a little bit low, but that's just Fortnite for you. It does stutter in the beginning quite a lot, and we are running on DirectX 12. Obviously, otherwise we would not have been able to enable or disable Lumen or Nanite. Now, you do want a little bit of a higher frame rate with Fortnite or in Fortnite, seeing that it's a competitive shooter. So we will restart the game and we'll enable the low preset. Some of the settings don't apply if you do it in game. So here we go. And we're back. We are on the low preset, still at native resolution. We're not making use of any upscaling, and we more than doubled our frame rate. Now, this is definitely what you want in a game like Fortnite. 200 frames per second is definitely playable in my opinion. You can definitely be competitive. I mean, you can, I'm not, but that's not the frame rate's fault. You can see that the lighting and the shadows are very reduced, and that helps a lot as well. Somebody shooting at me. It helps a lot in a game like Fortnite, so you'll notice players a little bit easier. It's not so easy to hide. And that just evens the playing field a little bit because most players or people that actually take this game seriously play on competitive settings. Now, these aren't the true competitive settings. This is just the low preset. If you want the full competitive settings, there's a lot of guides out there on the internet. You can definitely find some of that. But you can see our performance here is very good. We are getting an average of 256 frames per second. Our 1% lows are sitting at 193 and 116 for our 0.1% lows. Right, next up is Warzone, and here we will also be testing on the Ultra preset at 1080p. You can see that we've got no dynamic resolution scaling enabled, and no custom frame rate or VSync. As I said, we'll be playing on the Ultra preset with the render resolution of 100%. These are just the settings. I mean, this is just set by the preset, except we'll just disable all of the post-processing effects. All right, let's see how it goes. Okay, so this is a little bit weird. We are floating. The reason for that is the latency. You'll see that we are sitting at about 200 millisecond latency. The reason for that is I live in South Africa and we are currently experiencing extreme load shedding. Now, load shedding is the rotational power cuts, and that means that for 10 hours a day we don't have power. Now, I'm recording this from a battery backup, and that means that the area's internet is also affected. All right, but we're going to be doing my normal benchmark run on this abandoned ship here, and looking out over the water, we are getting about 90 frames per second, which is definitely playable. And looking this way, we are getting 125 frames per second. Now, the water is pretty intensive in this game, as I've mentioned countless times in my previous videos. You should probably not play at quality if you've got an RX 6600 XT, purely because you want, once again, a competitive frame rate. And I'd say that anything above 140, 150 frames per second is enough. We will be doing, as I mentioned earlier as well, all of these games we'll have a look at again in depth, and they will test multiple resolutions with multiple quality settings and multiple presets, just to see how this card does. I was obviously not able to do it in this video because this video would have been 4 hours long. All right, and we've completed our benchmark run here. We've got 170 frames per second average. Our 1% and 0.1% lows are a little bit low, but that's just the start of the battle royale. As you progress in this game, it does get better. As you can see, once we move away from the water, further inland, we are getting a much higher frame rates. All right, inside this building here, we're getting about 130 frames per second, 150 at times, and that's just because the water in this game is very intensive to render. Right, I think I hear somebody, but you can see here that our 1% and 0.1% lows are still a little bit low, but that's just because during the start of our benchmark run, we had a few dips there, and it hasn't had time to even out yet. I think here he comes now. I'll just wait for him. All right, we actually managed to get a kill. No ammo, no problem. Alright, so before I actually die in this game as well, that's it for this video. I hope you guys enjoyed it. If you did, remember to hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, and as always, we hope to see you in the next one.